Using the example of the unmusical man becoming musical, Aristotle identifies the principles of nature, and they are matter and form. What I want to focus on now is how matter and form um, provide the structure of sensible reality, how they are involved in all sensible things. Aristotle doesn't use this word, but other people use this word to describe Aristotle. Aristotle is a hylomorphist. He puts forward a theory of hylomorphism. That's a nice fancy word for you. It's a made up word made up by philosophers. What it means is that according to Aristotle, all the sensible things around us are composed of matter and form. All the sensible things around us are hylomorphic compounds. Hylomorphism comes from two different Greek words. They're the words that Aristotle uses for matter and form. The Greek word he uses for matter is hule. The Greek word he uses for form is morphe. You smash those two words together, you get hylomorphism. And Aristotle's view is that me, you, the desk, the rock, whatever, the plant, cats, they're all hylomorphic compounds. They're all composed of matter and form. And that to properly analyze them and understand them, you have to identify their material and their formal aspects. Right? That's what a full understanding of these things is going to consist in. And so, just to be clear, the principles of nature are matter and form. That's Aristotle's answer. And so, when he comes to this question, well, how many principles of nature are there? He's actually somewhat cagey. He says, there's two, but in a sense, there's three, but maybe two or three. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. Why does he why isn't he more straightforward? Why does he shift between two and three? Well, there are two. Well, because it's like matter and form. There are two things there. That's two. Well, in what sense are there three then? Well, in the sense that matter is can refer both to subject and privation. If you recall the earlier example about the musical man and all that, right? There were three key items. There was subject, privation, and form. Subject and privation are one numerically. They are the matter. And so there's two, if you just mention matter, there's just matter and form. But you might break down the matter into privation and subject, in which case you got three, right? So that's why he says, well, there's two, but maybe kind of three, but two. That's why he shifts between those two answers. All right, so all sensible things are hylomorphic compounds. Let's go through a couple examples. And so matter and form are the principles of nature, according to Aristotle. If you want to understand nature, if you want to understand the structure of reality, you need to understand how things are composed of matter and form. So here are some examples. So the basic idea is something like this. For any particular substance you have, any concrete particular individual you have, we can identify its material and its formal aspects. It is, in a sense, composed of matter and form. Aristotle's favorite example that he uses to illustrate hylomorphism, this idea that things are composed of matter and form, is a statue. And in particular, it's clear, a bronze statue, right? So you have like a bronze statue of Zeus, yeah, that you cast or something like that. Well, the material, the matter of that statue is the bronze. And its form is the shape that it comes to have. And this really easily or quite nicely picks up on the musical man example, right? The bronze underlies the whole process of change. Before the sculptor does whatever it is the sculptor does to produce this statue of Zeus, what we have is just a lump of bronze. That's the subject. That lump of bronze is the subject. And at the beginning, at least, before the sculptor casts it, that lump of bronze lacks the Zeus shape. Right? It lacks the form. It has the privation of that form. That bronze survives the whole process of change. The privation does not. The privation ceases to exist when the sculptor casts the statue, and the form comes into being. And so, more generally, Aristotle would say this hylomorphic compound comes into being. The statue of Zeus comes into being because that bronze becomes informed by this Zeus shape, thus producing the statue of Zeus. And so this statue of Zeus comes into being from this bronze lump or whatever, right? And so that statue of Zeus has this formal aspect, namely the Zeus shape, the shape that it comes to have, but then also this material aspect, what it's kind of made out of. And it's made out of that bronze. Now, one of the things we're going to see, just another example, why not? Another example of an artifact. Take something like a house. Things are going to get a little bit more complicated here. A house. What is the matter, the material element of a house? Aristotle is going to want to say it's like, well, the things that a house is made out of. So like floor joists and 2x4s and drywall and windows and bricks and blah, 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 right? All the stuff that the house is made out of. And what a builder does is they take all of those materials and they arrange them in a very particular way according to a kind of blueprint. And so the form is something like the shape of the house. It's the same kind of thing that you would find in the blueprint. Now, the form is not strictly speaking the blueprint, the actual drawing or whatever, right? But what the blueprint represents is in some ways the form of a house, the shape of the house. And what the builder does is to take that form, that shape, and arrange the matter, the wood, the bricks, and so on, in that shape, in that way. And in so doing, the house builder produces a house, right? So I put blueprint in quotes there because it's not strictly speaking the blueprint. The blueprint is, a drawing or whatever, but it's the idea, the shape of the house, which is what you find described in a blueprint. Now, as I was about to say earlier, I'll say now. Aristotle, what we're going to see, is most interested in living things. And we're going to see this interest come to the fore in the next work we're reading called the De Anima. But he's going to give a hylomorphic analysis of living things. And living things are primarily what nature is concerned with. It's not all that nature is concerned with, but Aristotle is going to say a statue of Zeus is not natural. A house, not natural. But living things are natural. And he's going to want to give a hylomorphic analysis of living things. So take something like a frog. Frogs, according to Aristotle, are composed of matter and form. They are hylomorphic compounds. The matter for a frog is going to be that out of which a frog is made. Frogs aren't made out of wood, bricks, or bronze or anything like that. They're made out of, frog organs. The particular organs that they have, frog bones and blood. I think they have blood. I don't know how frogs work, right? They're cold-blooded. They got to have blood if they're cold-blooded. And frog eyeballs and frog everything else, right? Those particular organs and bones and so on, That's what a frog is constituted out of. That's what a frog is made out of. More generally, when you're thinking of the matter of a thing, Aristotle would say it's what a thing comes out of, is made out of, is generated out of. Out of is a kind of key for isolating the matter of a hylomorphic compound. So a frog, in some sense, is made out of flesh and organs and bones and so on, right? That's the material element aspect of a frog. Well, what on earth is the form of a frog? Well, using these previous examples, we might say something like, I mean, it's like the kind of plan of a frog or the shape of a frog, the blueprint, but for a frog. It's the form of a frog. Yeah, something like that. This, for right now, is going to be left as a bit of a question mark. We're going to, the De Anima, the work that I just mentioned a minute ago, that's where Aristotle discusses what the form of a living thing is. That's what the De Anima is concerned with. And so we're going to kind of punt on this question for now. What is the shape, quote unquote, of a frog? What's the form of a frog? Who knows? It's somehow analogous to like the shape of the statue, some sort of arrangement or plan or shape, but I don't know. We're going to delay on that for now. We're going to punt on that for now. What I want to talk about now are 4 features of Aristotle's hylomorphism. So hopefully at this point, we're kind of getting a sense for what this means. It's a funny looking word. It's a new word. It's an impressive looking word. You start using that word, everyone's going to think you're real smart. But the idea is not that bad. It's just matter and form. Hylomorphism is just matter and formism. Things are made out of matter and form. And we've got all these examples now. And so hopefully the idea is not too bad, even if the word looks a little, daunting. 4 features of Aristotle's hylomorphism. These kind of come through the course of the physics. And so what I'm trying to do here is just collect some of these ideas to give us a better understanding of what exactly Aristotle thinks about matter and form. So in the first place, according to Aristotle, matter, this is not the way Aristotle puts the point. This is the way I'm putting the point. Matter is, quote unquote, on the edge of accepting the form. What does that mean? Aristotle is insistent that the matter for something like a frog is not going to be just whatever it is that makes them up. It's not going to be, because a frog is ultimately made out of atoms. It's ultimately made out of carbon and oxygen and nitrogen and I don't know. I'm sure there are other things. Whatever. Hydrogen, right? That's in there too. Those things, however, that's not really what the matter for a frog is, because those things aren't kind of right on the edge, so to speak, of being a frog. They are not keyed to being a frog. The matter for a frog are going to be the specific kinds of things that frogs in particular are made out of. And so that's going to be frog flesh, frog blood, frog bones, and so on. One way that he gets at this idea, or one implication of this idea, according to Aristotle, matter is to be identified with potentiality. The matter for a thing is what is immediately, potentially that thing. The matter for a frog is what is potentially a frog. This is probably easier if you think about something like a house. Aristotle would say, well, look, what are might say something like this. Look, houses are made out of bricks and wood and so on. Okay, fine. Well, is the matter for, let's say you go out into a forest where there's there's a lot of clay in the soil. Yeah. Is that clay and those trees, are those the matter for a house? Aristotle would want to say no. Even though you could build a house out of those things, right? You get the clay out of the ground, you make it into bricks, you cut the trees down, you make them into floor joists or whatever. Even though you could make a house out of those things, the clay in the ground and the trees in the forest are not really the matter for a house. The matter for some hylomorphic compound is what is ready and able to accept the relevant form. Trees and clay in the ground are not ready and able to accept the form of house. A lot needs to be done to them first. The trees need to be chopped down. They need to go through the sawmill where they're made into boards and so on. The clay needs to be taken out of the ground and mixed with other stuff and baked and formed and so on. Right? The trees, the clay are not immediately potentially a house. Right? A lot would have to be done to them first. And so that's not really the matter for a house. The matter for a house would be the bricks and the floor joists and the windows and so on, right? So matter is what's right on the edge of accepting the form. Now, a kind of related point, and what I was starting to get into, according to Aristotle, matter is itself a hylomorphic compound. How does this work? So let's take something like a frog. A frog, we have just identified as a hylomorphic compound just a few minutes ago. Well, that means it's composed out of like the frog shape, the shape of frog, the form of frog, whatever that is. Talk about it later. But then also like the flesh and organs and bones of a frog. Now, what Aristotle thinks is that we can now analyze the flesh and organs and bones, the matter of the frog, into form and matter itself. Right? And so we can look at the flesh and organs on the one flesh and organs and bones on the one hand, we can view them as the matter for a frog, but we can also view them as themselves hylomorphic compounds composed of form and matter. So let's just focus on bones, the bones of a frog. The bones of a frog, the bone of a frog, say, is itself a hylomorphic compound composed out of the bone shape or the form of a bone, and then, say, bone cells, right? And so the matter for a frog is itself a hylomorphic compound, and we could keep going. The bone cells themselves, they're the kind of matter for the bone of a frog, but the bone cells themselves are hylomorphic compounds that are composed of the form of the cell, say, and then the various materials of the cell, the nucleus, the vacuoles, the whatever, mitochondria, the mighty mitochondria. And then you could do the same thing for those, right? You could look at the mitochondria. It's composed of form and matter, and just keep going, according to Aristotle. And you would eventually end, in Aristotle's view at least, with the basic material elements, which he obviously didn't know about carbon and hydrogen and so on. And so of course he didn't know about quarks and leptons and the fundamental particles of physics that we now know about. He thought the basic elements of things were the four elements: earth, air, fire, and water. And so you'd eventually end there. And then earth, air, there's a huge debate within Aristotelian scholarship. Are earth, air, fire, and water themselves hylomorphic compounds? We don't need to get into it. I don't think they are. But anyways, it doesn't really matter. So you'd bottom out there. You'd bottom out with these four basic elements. Third feature of Aristotle's hylomorphism. You can't just put a form in any old matter. Form necessitates particular kinds of matter. Particular forms require particular kinds of matter. If you want to make a sword, you cannot make that out of cotton candy. If you want to make a house, you can't make it out of, I don't know, styrofoam. You need particular material. You need a particular matter for a particular form. people on the internet are really weird these days, although I suppose they probably always have been. And so you can find these YouTube videos of people making. I used to always use swords and knives as my example, but you can find YouTube videos of people making knives out of pasta and whatever. But the point still holds, right? So here's a better example, right? Cakes. You want to make a cake, a tasty cake. You can't make that out of metal or glass. It won't work. I don't recommend trying it. It needs to be made out of flour, sugar, eggs, and oil, and whatever else you make a cake out of. Right? So particular form, the form of cake necessitates a particular kind of matter. The form of sword necessitates a particular kind of matter. So forms require particular kinds of matter. The shape of frog, the form of frog requires frog flesh, frog organs, frog bones, and so on. And the last point I want to make is that according to Aristotle, form is quote unquote, this is his phrase, not mine. Form is that for the sake of which. It is what we are trying to realize. It's why we enact the changes that we do. The form is the goal or purpose of the change, say, of the generation. And we're going to talk about this more when we get to nature. Another way that Aristotle will get at this point is that form is actuality. And so, what does the builder say? Let's use this example again. They have this pile of wood and bricks and windows and so on. They have the matter for a house. That matter is potentially a house. It's right on the edge of accepting the form. All it needs is a person with the form to come along and impose that form on those materials. That person, of course, is the builder. And so what does the builder do? The builder does what the builder does to these materials in order to produce the form of house in those materials. The builder, that for the sake of which they are doing what they are doing, is the realization of the form. They are trying to actualize the form in these materials. That's the purpose. That's the goal. That's what Aristotle means by that for the sake of which, the goal, the purpose. And so form is the goal or purpose of things. It is the actuality of things. That lump of bronze is potentially a statue of Zeus. And when it becomes the statue of Zeus, it has acquired its form. It is now actually a statue of Zeus because it has that form. And so form gets identified with actuality. Matter is identified with potentiality. Matter is what is potentially a form. And when a thing acquires that form, when that form comes to be present in that matter, it has now achieved its actuality, which is the goal or purpose of things. The goal or purpose of things is to be what they are. So this last point in particular needs further elaboration. And that's what we're going to do going forward. We're going to try to understand what exactly this might mean for natural things, and then more particularly, what it might mean for human beings.